The fluorescent lights in the emergency room felt like they were drilling into my skull. My husband David lay on the hospital bed, his face contorted in what I'd mistaken for pain, but was actually something else entirely. Fear. The nurse, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a knowing expression, caught my gaze and leaned close to my ear. Her breath smelled like mint gum. "Watch this," she whispered. Then she pulled back the sheet covering David's lower body and asked him, in a voice loud enough for the entire bay to hear, to explain how he'd gotten that particular injury. The bruise between his legs was shaped like a bite mark, a human bite mark. And as David stammered and turned the color of overripe tomatoes, I felt my entire world tilt on its axis. The emergency room was packed that night, every bed occupied, the air thick with antiseptic and sweat and the metallic tang of blood. A baby was crying 3 beds down. Someone was moaning in pain behind a curtain. The television mounted in the corner was playing the late news on mute, images of politicians and weather maps flickering past, unnoticed. But in that moment, everything else faded away. There was just me, the nurse, and David's rapidly crumbling facade. The nurse's name tag read Sandra. She had salt and pepper hair pulled back in a tight bun and crow's feet that suggested she'd spent decades witnessing human drama in this sterile environment. She didn't look surprised by David's injury. She looked knowing, like she'd seen this exact scenario play out before, probably more times than she could count. "Sir," she repeated, her voice clinical but carrying an edge of judgment that cut through the emergency room noise, "I need you to tell your wife how this happened, for the medical record." David's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. I could see his mind racing, trying to construct a lie that would make sense. He'd told the intake nurse he'd had a cycling accident, that his bike had hit a pothole and he'd slammed into the crossbar. But there was no explaining away a human bite mark with that story, not when Sandra had clearly seen enough injuries to know the difference between blunt force trauma and teeth marks. I watched my husband, this man I'd spent 17 years of my life with, struggle to find words. His hands were gripping the thin hospital blanket so tightly his knuckles had gone white. There was a sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the aggressive air conditioning. And in his eyes, I saw something I'd never seen before. Not just fear, panic. The kind of cornered animal panic that comes from knowing there's no way out. But let me take you back 3 months, to when I still believed in the life we'd built together. It was a Tuesday morning in late June, and Boston was experiencing one of those perfect summer days that make you forget about the brutal winters. I was in our kitchen in Beacon Hill, sunlight streaming through the bay windows, making patterns on the marble countertops David had insisted we install during the renovation. I was organizing receipts for our accountant, a tedious task I'd taken on because David claimed his work was too demanding. That's when I found it, a receipt from Tiffany's for $8,000. The date was last Thursday, when David had supposedly been in meetings all day. I held the thin piece of paper in my hands, feeling its weight despite how light it was. $8,000. We'd discussed getting me a new wedding band for our anniversary, but that was still 2 months away. Maybe he'd bought it early as a surprise. The receipt was printed on that distinctive Tiffany blue paper, elegant and expensive. I studied every detail. The transaction had been processed at 2:47 p.m. The item was listed only as fine jewelry, no specific description. It had been paid for with our Amex, the one we used for major purchases. I remember setting the receipt down on the kitchen counter and staring at it for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Outside the window, I could hear our neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, watering her garden, the rhythmic spray of water punctuated by her humming. A delivery truck rumbled past. A dog barked. Normal sounds of a normal day. But inside our pristine kitchen, with its white cabinets and stainless steel appliances and that $8,000 receipt, nothing felt normal anymore. My hands were shaking slightly as I picked up the receipt again and walked to David's study. The room was quintessentially him. Leather chairs, mahogany desk, walls lined with business books and awards from his real estate firm. Everything arranged just so, controlled and perfect. I placed the receipt on his desk, centered on his keyboard where he couldn't miss it. A gentle reminder that I'd seen it, nothing accusatory. I wanted to give him the chance to tell me himself. The rest of that day, I couldn't focus on anything. I tried to read but couldn't absorb the words. I attempted to work on my volunteer project for the museum but kept staring blankly at my computer screen. I made lunch but couldn't eat it. That receipt sat in my mind like a stone, heavy and immovable. I kept constructing scenarios. Maybe it was for me, a surprise anniversary gift. Maybe it was for his mother, though her birthday wasn't until December. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation that would make me laugh at my own paranoia. When David came home that evening, loosening his tie as he walked through the door, I waited. He kissed my forehead, asked what was for dinner, poured himself a scotch. No mention of any surprise. No guilty excitement about a secret gift. Just normalcy. He talked about a difficult client, about traffic on the pike, about needing to schedule the lawn service. He went into his study to change out of his suit. I heard drawers opening, the clink of his belt buckle as he changed into casual clothes. He must have seen the receipt. It was impossible to miss. But when he emerged 15 minutes later in khakis and a polo shirt, he said nothing. And that's when the first seed of doubt planted itself in my mind, tiny and dark, like a splinter I couldn't quite reach. That night, I couldn't sleep. David snored beside me, oblivious, while I stared at the ceiling fan rotating lazily above us. The house we'd bought 15 years ago suddenly felt unfamiliar, like I was seeing it through someone else's eyes. This wasn't the charming historical home where we'd planned to grow old together. It was just a building, full of expensive things and empty promises. I know you're probably thinking I should have confronted him right then, demanded answers. But when you've spent 17 years building a life with someone, when you've weathered financial struggles and family deaths and all the mundane heartbreaks of everyday existence together, you don't just throw that away over a receipt. You give them the benefit of the doubt. You give them a chance to explain. That was my first mistake. Around 3 a.m, I slipped out of bed and went downstairs. The house was dark except for the streetlights filtering through the windows, casting everything in shades of gray. I made chamomile tea I didn't drink and sat at the kitchen table, turning that receipt over in my mind. Maybe I should just ask him directly. But something held me back. Some instinct that once I asked, once I made my suspicions known, everything would change. The question itself would be an accusation. And if I was wrong, if there was an innocent explanation, I'd have damaged our trust over nothing. But what if I wasn't wrong? The next morning, I found the handkerchief. I was putting David's blazer away, the one he'd worn to his supposed client dinner, when something fell from the pocket. It was silk, cream-colored, with delicate lace edges, and it was stained with lipstick. Not my shade. I wore muted roses and soft corals. This was a bold crimson, the kind of color that announced itself when a woman walked into a room. My hands trembled as I held it up to the light streaming through our bedroom window. The lipstick stain was on one corner, a perfect lip print, as if someone had used it to blot their lipstick after applying it. But there were other stains too. Faint makeup marks, foundation or powder, and something else, something I didn't want to think too hard about, a smell. Not David's cologne, something floral and expensive, a woman's perfume I didn't recognize. The metallic taste of shock filled my mouth, and I had to sit down on the edge of our bed to keep from falling. The room spun around me, and I focused on a water stain on the ceiling, something I'd been meaning to have fixed for months, to ground myself. The handkerchief felt impossibly light in my hands, a tiny scrap of fabric that somehow weighed more than everything else in the room combined. I should explain something about David and me. We met in college, both of us studying business at Boston University. He was charming and ambitious, always talking about the empire he was going to build. I was drawn to his confidence, his certainty about the future. We got married 2 years after graduation, a small wedding in my parents' backyard in Newton. We struggled those first few years. David was working 60-hour weeks at a small real estate firm, trying to prove himself. I was doing administrative work at a law firm, bringing in steady income while he chased commission-based sales. We were a team back then, real partners. When he finally made his first big sale, we celebrated with cheap champagne and Chinese takeout. When my father died and left me a small inheritance, we used it as a down payment on the Beacon Hill house. We painted walls together, refinished the floors ourselves, turned that historical property into something beautiful. Or at least I thought we had. I thought we were building something together, a life, a future, a partnership based on trust and shared dreams. But holding that handkerchief, I realized I didn't know what we'd built. Maybe it had always been a facade, pretty on the outside but hollow within. Or maybe it had been real once and had slowly rotted away while I wasn't paying attention. I couldn't decide which possibility was worse. When David came home that evening, I was waiting in the living room, the handkerchief laid out on the coffee table between us like evidence at a crime scene. He barely glanced at it before he started laughing. Laughing. The sound was sharp and cruel, slicing through the careful composure I'd maintained all day. "Margaret, are you serious right now?" he said, shaking his head like I was a child who'd said something adorably stupid. "That's from the dry cleaners. They must have mixed up our order with someone else's. Do you know how paranoid you sound?" The word paranoid hit me like a slap. Was I being paranoid? Had I jumped to conclusions? I picked up the handkerchief, holding it out to him. "This was in your blazer pocket, David. Your pocket. How would the dry cleaners put someone else's handkerchief in your pocket?" He sighed, the kind of exasperated sigh you'd give a particularly difficult child. "I don't know, Margaret. Maybe I grabbed the wrong jacket. Maybe someone at the restaurant left it on a chair and I picked it up by mistake." There are a dozen innocent explanations, but instead of asking me about it like a rational person, you're sitting here in the dark like I've committed some crime. It's insulting. His indignation was so convincing, so absolute. For a moment, I wondered if I really was being paranoid. Maybe there were innocent explanations. People made mistakes. Things got mixed up. But then I thought about the receipt, the one he'd seen and said nothing about, and I felt the ground shift beneath me again. "What about the Tiffany's receipt?" I asked, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. $8,000. Last Thursday, when you said you were in meetings all day." David's face changed. Just for a second, so quick I almost missed it. A flash of something. Guilt? Calculation? Then his expression smoothed into concerned confusion. "What are you talking about?" "The receipt on your desk," I said. "From Tiffany's. $8,000. He stood up, went to his study, came back with the receipt in his hand. He studied it like he was seeing it for the first time, though I knew he'd had 2 days to prepare an explanation. "Oh, this," he said finally. "It's for my mother. Her birthday is coming up, and I wanted to get her something special. She mentioned wanting a new bracelet." "Your mother's birthday is in December," I said quietly. "It's June. I like to shop early," he said, not missing a beat. "You know how she is. If I wait until the last minute, nothing will be good enough. This way, I can have it sized and adjusted if needed." The lie was smooth, practiced, but it was still a lie. I knew David's mother. She was a practical woman who valued sensible gifts. She'd be horrified if David spent $8,000 on jewelry for her. She'd consider it wasteful, extravagant, inappropriate. But I didn't say any of that. I just nodded and watched my husband, this stranger wearing a familiar face, and felt something inside me harden into ice. "David, you said vows were sacred," I thought, but didn't say. "But it seems you've been auctioning them to the highest bidder." That night, the word paranoid echoed in my head like a curse. Was I being paranoid? Had I jumped to conclusions? David had always been a good husband, a provider, attentive when he had time. But lately, Time was something he never seemed to have. The late nights at the office had started 6 months ago, the business trips that kept extending, the phone calls he took in the other room. Small things, individually meaningless, but together they formed a pattern I'd been too afraid to acknowledge. Have you ever doubted your own sanity? Had someone you love twist your reality so thoroughly that you can't trust your own perceptions? That's where I was that night. David left the handkerchief on the table, dismissing it so completely that I started to wonder if maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it really was a dry cleaning mix-up. Maybe the Tiffany's receipt was for a client gift or his mother. Maybe I was being the irrational, emotional woman he was implying I was. I lay awake that night while he slept peacefully beside me, and I hated myself for doubting my own eyes, my own instincts, my own worth. But in the morning, something had shifted. I woke up before dawn and watched David sleep, really looked at him for the first time in months. His face was relaxed, unguarded, and I realized I didn't recognize the man I'd married anymore. Or maybe I'd never really known him at all. That thought was more terrifying than any affair could be. I got out of bed quietly and went downstairs to my laptop. If I was going crazy, I wanted proof. If I wasn't, I needed to know the truth. Either way, the tearful, doubting version of myself died in that moment. What emerged was colder, sharper, more focused. The early morning light was just beginning to filter through the kitchen windows as I opened my laptop. My hands were steady now. The shaking had stopped. I felt clear-headed in a way I hadn't in weeks. If David could be methodical about his deception, I could be methodical about uncovering it. I started with the basics. Bank statements, credit card bills, phone records. Everything was password protected, but I knew David's passwords. He'd never bothered to change them because he'd never had reason to hide anything from me. Or so I'd thought. We used the same system we'd set up years ago. His mother's maiden name followed by the year we got married. Simple, predictable, secure enough for someone who didn't expect his wife to go looking for secrets. I logged into our joint checking account first and felt my stomach drop. There were charges I'd never seen. The Motel 6 on Route 1, dated 3 weeks ago. A Tuesday night. David had said he was working late. The charge was for $98. Why would someone with David's income choose a Motel 6? Unless the point wasn't comfort. The point was not being recognized. I scrolled further. Gasoline purchases in towns I'd never heard David mention. Restaurants in the South End I'd never been to. More hotels. The Colonnade, the Fairmont, the Liberty. Each one on a night when David had claimed to be working late or visiting clients. I pulled out my planner and cross-referenced the dates. Every single hotel charge corresponded with a night David had come home after midnight, apologizing for how demanding his job was. And then I saw the charges to jewelry stores besides Tiffany's. Cartier, Harry Winston, a boutique on Newbury Street I'd walked past 100 times but never entered because the window displays alone were intimidatingly expensive. The amounts were staggering. Thousands of dollars every few weeks, spent on a life I knew nothing about. But it was the transfers that made my blood run cold. Regular payments to a separate account, one I didn't have access to. $10,000 a month, like clockwork, for the past 8 months. $80,000 of our money, siphoned away into the shadows. The account number was unfamiliar. I tried to click through to see more details, but I didn't have access. David had set up the transfers to process automatically, quietly, without any notification. I sat there in our kitchen, watching the sun rise over Beacon Hill, and felt my entire reality reshape itself. This wasn't a momentary indiscretion. This wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness. This was systematic, planned, executed with the same precision David applied to his real estate deals. He'd been building another life, another world, right under my nose. And I'd been so busy being the supportive wife, managing our home and our social calendar, and all the invisible labor that kept our life running smoothly, that I'd completely missed it. My neighbor Linda found me an hour later, still sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the laptop screen. She'd come over to return a book she'd borrowed, let herself in through the back door like she always did, and stopped dead when she saw my face. "What happened?" she asked, setting down her coffee mug and pulling out a chair. I showed her everything. Linda had worked in IT security before retiring, and her eyes narrowed as she scrolled through the statements. "This isn't just an affair, Margaret," she said quietly. "This is systematic. This is someone building a whole separate life." Her words should have broken me, but instead they crystallized something inside me. Confirmation, validation, purpose. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't paranoid. I was married to a man who'd been systematically betraying me while gaslighting me into doubting my own perceptions. Linda stayed for hours. She showed me how to install a tracking app on David's phone, how to set up email forwarding so I'd receive copies of everything he sent or received, how to access cloud storage and hidden folders. It was like learning a new language, the language of digital surveillance and calculated distrust. "We need to be careful," Linda warned, her voice low even though we were alone in my house. "If he catches you doing this, he'll lock everything down, delete evidence, maybe even try to have you committed for invading his privacy. I've seen it happen. Men like this, when they're cornered, they get dangerous. Not necessarily physically, though that too sometimes, but they'll use every tool they have to discredit you, make you look unstable, untrustworthy. They'll flip the script so fast you won't know what hit you." "So what do?" I asked. "We wait," she said firmly. "We watch. We gather evidence until you have so much he can't talk his way out of it. Until his lawyers can't spin it. Until everyone who matters sees exactly who he is." I nodded, feeling something shift in my chest. The paralysis of shock was wearing off, replaced by something harder and more dangerous. Cold rage, the kind that doesn't scream or throw things, the kind that calculates and plans and waits for the perfect moment to strike. Linda helped me install the tracking software on David's phone that afternoon. He'd left it charging in the study, something he did every day when he got home. We had maybe 20 minutes before he came looking for it. Linda worked quickly, her fingers flying over the screen, downloading the app and hiding it in a folder of utilities David never used. "It's invisible," she explained. "Won't show up in his app list. Won't drain his battery noticeably. But you'll be able to see everywhere he goes, in real time." The email forwarding was trickier. We had to access his laptop, which meant waiting until he was in the shower. Linda stood guard at the bathroom door while I navigated through his email settings, adding my secret email address to his forwarding list. Every message he sent or received would now come to me too, a carbon copy of his digital life. By the time David emerged from the shower, everything was back to normal. His phone was charging where he'd left it. His laptop was closed on his desk. Linda was in the kitchen helping me prepare dinner, chatting about her plans to visit her daughter in Portland next month. David joined us. Freshly showered and relaxed, poured himself a glass of wine, and asked Linda about her book club. The picture of domestic normalcy. All while I knew that every move he made, every message he sent, every lie he told would now be documented. That evening, I played the perfect wife. I smiled when David came home. I asked about his day. I served his favorite dinner, pot roast with roasted vegetables, the meal I'd perfected over years of marriage. He ate with gusto, complimenting my cooking, telling me about a difficult client he'd dealt with. His lies flowed so smoothly, so naturally, that I marveled at how practiced he must be. How long had he been deceiving me? How many times had I smiled and nodded while he fed me fiction? I watched him across the table, this stranger wearing my husband's face, and felt nothing. The love I'd carried for 17 years had curdled into something bitter and hard. A betrayal this deep doesn't heal. It scars over. Over the next few weeks, the evidence accumulated like snow in a New England winter. Relentless, suffocating, beautiful in its completeness. The tracking app showed David's frequent visits to an apartment in the South End, a trendy neighborhood full of young professionals and overpriced cocktail bars. He went there 3, sometimes 4 times a week. Always in the evening, always staying for hours. The email forwarding revealed a correspondence with someone named Jessica, full of intimate details and plans for a future that didn't include me. The first email I read made me physically ill. David describing me as a burden he had to endure, a necessary evil until he could extract himself financially. Jessica responding with sympathy and excitement about their plans to move to California together. California. He was planning to leave the state, take our money, and start fresh with this woman I'd never heard of. I printed every email, screenshots of every text message the forwarding captured. I created folders organized by date and category. Financial infidelity, emotional affair, physical evidence. I was methodical, thorough, clinical. Linda helped me set up a separate cloud storage account where everything was backed up, just in case David somehow discovered what I was doing and tried to delete evidence from my computer. One night, about 2 weeks into my surveillance, I followed him. Linda had offered to come with me, but I needed to do this alone. I needed to see with my own eyes what the tracking app was telling me. David left the office at 7, like he always did on Thursdays. His supposed late meeting night. I followed 3 cars behind, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. He drove straight to the south end, parked on a tree-lined street near Union Park, and walked up to a brownstone building. She was waiting for him at the door. Jessica. She was younger than me, maybe early 30s, with long dark hair and the kind of effortless style that comes from having money and time. She wore expensive athleisure, the kind you see in yoga studios in wealthy neighborhoods. They kissed on the doorstep. Not a peck, a real kiss, passionate and familiar. Then they went inside together, and I sat in my car at the end of the block, watching the lights come on in a 3rd-floor apartment. I waited for 2 hours, watched as the lights in what must have been the living room went dark and the bedroom lights came on, watched as even those eventually dimmed. I should have felt devastated, heartbroken. Instead, I felt vindicated. Every instinct I doubted was correct. Every paranoid thought was justified. I wasn't crazy. I was married to a liar. When David came home that night at 11:30, I was in bed pretending to read. He kissed my forehead, told me the meeting had run late, took a shower to wash away the evidence of his other life. And I smiled and said I understood and went back to my book, playing my part perfectly while planning his downfall. Photos. God, the photos. The cloud storage access Linda had helped me set up revealed a whole archive I'd never known existed. David and Jessica at restaurants I'd never been to. Beaches I'd never walked on. Hotel rooms I'd never seen. They looked happy, in love. The way David used to look at me, back when we were young and everything felt possible. There were receipts for gifts I'd never received. Jewelry and lingerie and weekend getaways. All purchased with our money. With the income I'd helped him build by managing our home, by being the supportive wife while he climbed the career ladder, by sacrificing my own ambitions so he could chase his. I'd wanted to open an art gallery after college. I was good at it, had an eye for emerging talent, contacts in the Boston art scene. But when David's career took off, when the demands of his job grew, I'd set that aside. Someone needed to manage our home, our social life, the networking dinners and charity events that helped build his reputation. I'd told myself it was temporary, that once we were more established, once things settled down, I'd pursue my own dreams. But settled down never came. David's career just kept expanding, demanding more and more of his time and my support, and I'd given it willingly because I believed in us, in our partnership, in the life we were building together. What a fool I'd been. Linda helped me compile everything into a comprehensive folder, organized by date and category: financial infidelity, emotional affair, physical evidence. It read like a legal brief, cold and factual, stripping away any romance or justification David might try to claim. This wasn't a momentary weakness. This wasn't a mistake. This was a choice, repeated hundreds of times over 8 months, maybe longer. Who knew how far back the deception really went? I printed everything, made digital backups, stored copies in 3 different locations. Linda's house. A safety deposit box I'd opened in my maiden name. The cloud storage account David didn't know existed. I was thorough. I was methodical. I was done crying. The smoking gun came on a Tuesday afternoon, exactly 1 month after I'd found that first receipt. I was searching through David's email when I found a message from his accountant. It referenced a separate business account David had opened, one he'd never mentioned to me. The email included a link to the statements, and when I clicked it, I felt my breath catch. $300,000. He'd been moving money from our joint accounts into this secret fund for over a year. Small amounts at first, then larger and larger transfers. Our retirement savings. The money we'd earmarked for renovating the vacation home in the Cape. The inheritance from my mother that I'd added to our nest egg. Money she'd saved her entire life working as a teacher. Money she'd left to me because she trusted I'd use it wisely. All of it, systematically stolen and hidden away. And in the most recent emails, David was discussing buying a condo. For Jessica. With my money. With my inheritance. With the future I'd thought we were building together. I closed the laptop and sat in silence. The house was empty, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the hardwood floors. I should have been devastated. I should have been screaming or breaking things or dissolving into tears. Instead, I felt a strange calm settle over me, like ice forming on a pond. My sadness had crystallized into something harder and more purposeful. Cold rage has a clarity that hot anger lacks. It sees through the emotion to the strategy beneath. It calculates. It plans. It waits for the perfect moment to strike. And my moment was coming. I spent the next 2 weeks playing my role perfectly. I laughed at David's jokes. I planned our anniversary party. A grand celebration at our Beacon Hill home. I invited everyone, family, friends, David's colleagues and clients, the partners from his real estate firm. I hired caterers and a bartender. I bought a new dress, emerald green silk that made me feel powerful. David was delighted with my enthusiasm, proud of his wife for throwing such an elegant event. He had no idea I was building a stage for his downfall. Every invitation I sent was another witness I was gathering. Every detail I planned was another nail in his coffin. Linda helped me coordinate, grinning wickedly whenever we discussed the specifics. "This is going to be legendary," she whispered over coffee one morning. I smiled back, feeling something fierce and feral uncurl in my chest. Damn right it will be. The guest list was carefully curated. David's mother and father, his sister Rachel, who'd always been kind to me, my own family, my brother Tom and his wife Sarah, our friends from the neighborhood, from the country club, from charity boards we served on together. David's business partners, the senior associates at his firm, his biggest clients, everyone who mattered in our carefully constructed social world. They'd all witnessed the truth together. I rented a projector and screen, told David it was for showing photos from our wedding and honeymoon, a nostalgic trip down memory lane. He loved the idea. Even helped me test the equipment, making sure the screen was positioned where everyone could see it from the garden, setting up his own execution without even knowing it. But I nearly lost everything 3 days before the party. David came home early, something he never did, and I was in the study reviewing the evidence folder on my laptop. I heard his car in the driveway and had maybe 10 seconds to close everything and clear my browser history. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might burst from my chest as I shut the laptop and grabbed a book from the shelf, trying to look casual. David walked in, loosening his tie, and paused when he saw me. "What are you doing in here?" he asked, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Just looking for that cookbook your mother gave me?" I lied, holding up a random book I'd grabbed. "Thought it might be with your business stuff." The moment stretched between us, taut as a wire. David's eyes scanned the room, looking for anything out of place. I could see him calculating, trying to decide if my presence here was innocent or suspicious. I forced myself to breathe normally, to meet his gaze without flinching, to be the wife he expected me to be. slightly scattered, a little disorganized, certainly not capable of the kind of digital surveillance I'd been conducting for weeks. Then David shrugged and moved to his desk, shuffling through some papers. "Found it?" he asked absently. "No, must be in the kitchen," I said, standing up on legs that felt like water. "I'll check there." I walked out calmly, closed the door behind me, and made it to the bathroom before my knees buckled. I sat on the edge of the tub, shaking, pressing my hands over my mouth to muffle the sound of my breathing. That was too close, too reckless. I'd gotten careless because I was so focused on the endgame that I'd forgotten to watch my back in the present. Linda was right. If David discovered what I knew, he'd hide everything, lock down the accounts, maybe even try to have me committed or claim I was unstable. I'd seen it happen to other women. The husband gets caught, flips the script, suddenly his wife is the crazy one, paranoid, delusional, obsessed, going through his phone and emails because she's mentally unstable, not because he's cheating. The sympathy shifts to him. Poor David, dealing with an irrational wife. It was a playbook I'd seen run before, and I refused to be another woman whose truth was dismissed as hysteria. I took a long shower, letting the hot water steady my nerves, and made a promise to myself. No more mistakes. No more close calls. Just 3 more days until the party. I could play my part for 3 more days. Those final 3 days felt like walking a tightrope while pretending to stroll through a park. Every interaction with David required careful calibration. Too friendly, and he might suspect I was hiding something. Too cold, and he'd know something was wrong. I aimed for normal, for the slightly distant warmth of a long-married couple, comfortable in their routine. The day before the party, I got my hair done at the salon on Charles Street. Highlights and a trim, nothing dramatic. The stylist, a chatty woman named Monica, talked about her own husband while she worked. 23 years we've been married, she said, sectioning my hair with practiced efficiency. Still drives me crazy sometimes, but I can't imagine life without him. You and David are the same, right? High school sweethearts? College, I corrected, watching my reflection in the mirror. And we're not sweethearts anymore. Tomorrow night, everyone's going to find out why. Monica's hands stilled. What? You'll see, I said, meeting her eyes in the mirror. Make sure you check social media tomorrow night. It's going to be quite a show. Her face went pale, but I just smiled and changed the subject. I'd already decided that if I was doing this, I was doing it completely. No half measures, no quiet divorce and settlement agreement that let David save face. He'd spent 8 months building a secret life with my money while gaslighting me into doubting my sanity. He deserved every bit of exposure coming his way. The anniversary party fell on a Saturday in late August. One of those perfect late summer evenings when the heat has broken, but the air still holds warmth. Our home in Beacon Hill looked stunning. White lights strung through the garden, tables with crisp linens and fresh flowers, a jazz trio playing softly on the terrace. Guests arrived in waves, air-kissing and complimenting my dress and the ambiance. David worked the room like the charming businessman he was, shaking hands and telling stories, his arm occasionally draping around my shoulders in a show of affection that made my skin crawl. I smiled through it all, the perfect hostess, while Linda moved through the crowd, ensuring everyone had drinks and knew where to sit. The tension in my shoulders was almost unbearable, but I held it together. The trap was set. All I needed was the right moment. I'd planned every detail of the evening down to the minute. Cocktails at 7, dinner at 8, the presentation at 9:30, after everyone had eaten and had enough wine to loosen their inhibitions, but not so much they'd miss the significance of what they were witnessing. The timing had to be perfect. Dinner was a blur. I sat at the head table next to David, pushing food around my plate while he entertained our guests with stories about his recent real estate triumphs. Our friends laughed and raised their glasses. David's mother kept smiling at me, this warm, grateful smile that said thank you for loving my son. The guilt of what I was about to do to her flickered through me, but I pushed it away. She needed to know who her son really was. They all did. That moment came after dinner, when the sun had set and the garden glowed with soft light. David clinked his glass, calling for everyone's attention, preparing to give a toast. I intercepted him smoothly, taking the microphone from his hand with a laugh. "Let me go first, darling," I said, and the endearment tasted like ash in my mouth. "I want to say a few words about our incredible journey together." David smiled indulgently and gestured for me to proceed. The guests quieted, turning their attention to me. Linda stood near the back, her hand on the laptop that was connected to the projector we'd set up, ostensibly for showing photos from our wedding and early years together. 17 years ago, I began, my voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I married a man I thought I knew. We built this life together, this beautiful home, this circle of wonderful people. I believed in us. I believed in loyalty and trust and sacred vows. I paused, watching David's smile start to falter, some instinct warning him that something was wrong. But as it turns out, I was the only one honoring those vows. "Linda, if you would." She pressed a button, and the first image appeared on the screen behind me. David and Jessica at a restaurant, gazing at each other intimately. The crowd gasped. David's face went white, then red, then a mottled purple. "Margaret, what are you doing?" he hissed, reaching for the microphone. I stepped back, keeping it away from him. "I'm showing everyone the truth," I said calmly. The next slide showed text messages, blown up large enough for everyone to read. Explicit messages about hotel rooms and stolen afternoons. The gasps turned to whispers, shocked murmurs rippling through the crowd like a wave. "Please," David said, his voice cracking, "please don't do this." But I was merciless. The slides continued. Bank statements showing the hidden account. Receipts for jewelry and trips. The $300,000 account he'd funded with our money, with my inheritance. Photos of the condo he'd been planning to buy for Jessica. Each image was another revelation, another layer of deception exposed. David's mother stood up, her hand over her mouth. I saw the devastation on her face and felt a pang of regret. She didn't deserve this, but she deserved the truth. His business partner's face had gone hard and cold. Our friends looked between us, horror and fascination warring on their faces. Someone had started recording on their phone. Good. Let it go viral. Let everyone know exactly who David was. "This is my inheritance," I said, pointing to a slide showing the transfer of my mother's life savings into David's secret account. My mother worked for 40 years as a public school teacher. She saved every penny she could so I'd have security. And David took it, stole it, to buy a love nest for his mistress. The crowd erupted, angry voices, someone shouting at David. His sister Rachel was crying. His father looked like he wanted to disappear into the ground. And David just stood there, his mouth opening and closing, no words coming out. 8 months, I continued, my voice cutting through the chaos. 8 months of lies. Maybe more. How many times did you look me in the eye and tell me you loved me while you were planning your escape? How many times did I smile and play the supportive wife while you robbed me blind? David tried to speak, but nothing came out. He looked around at the faces staring at him, judgment written clearly on everyone. And I saw the moment he realized there was no talking his way out of this, no charm or manipulation that could erase what everyone had just witnessed. I handed the microphone to Linda and walked out of my own party, leaving David standing in the ruins of his reputation. The night air was cool on my flushed face. I could hear the chaos erupting behind me, voices raised in shock and condemnation. My hands were shaking, but inside I felt nothing but a vast, empty calm. It was done. The mask was ripped away. The truth was out. I sat in my car, parked at the curb, and watched through the window as guests began leaving, some stopping to stare at David, others hurrying away from the spectacle. His mother left without speaking to him. His business partner looked like he wanted to throw a punch, and David just stood there, diminished and exposed, everything he'd built collapsing around him like a house of cards in a strong wind. Linda found me 20 minutes later, sliding into the passenger seat with 2 glasses of champagne from the party. "To truth," she said, handing me one. "To truth," I echoed, and we drank in silence, watching the last guests trickle out of the house. The aftermath was swift and brutal. By Monday morning, David's business partners had called an emergency meeting. The firm couldn't afford to be associated with someone who'd been publicly exposed as a thief and an adulterer. Real estate is built on trust, and David had none left. They forced him to sell his partnership share at a significant loss, effectively ending his career in Boston's tight-knit real estate community. I heard about the meeting from Rachel, David's sister, who called me Monday afternoon. "I'm so sorry, Margaret," she said, her voice thick with tears. I had no idea. None of us did. She told me about the partners' meeting, about how they'd given David an ultimatum: sell his share or be forced out with nothing. He took the buyout. 50 cents on the dollar, a humiliating exit from the firm he'd helped build. Jessica, it turned out, had no interest in standing by her man once the money stopped flowing. She ended things within a week, leaving David alone in the wreckage. I learned this from a private investigator I'd hired to track David's movements after the party. I wanted to make sure he wasn't hiding assets or trying to flee the state before our divorce was finalized. The PI's report showed Jessica blocking David's number, refusing to see him when he showed up at her apartment, eventually moving out of state entirely. California, ironically, the place they'd planned to start fresh together. But she went alone. David's friends fell away. His family sided with me once they learned the full extent of his deception. His father called me personally to apologize. "I never raised my son to be this kind of man," he said, his voice breaking. "Your mother would be ashamed of what he did with her money." I accepted his apology and told him I didn't blame him. This was David's choice, David's failure, no one else's. Within 2 weeks of the party, David had moved out of our Beacon Hill home and into a small apartment in Somerville, a dramatic downgrade from the life he'd grown accustomed to. The tracking app I'd never uninstalled showed him going to work at a commercial real estate firm in the suburbs, a definite step down from his partnership position. Coming home alone every night. No more visits to the South End. No more late nights at expensive restaurants. Just a small apartment and a diminished life. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. My lawyer was a shark, a woman Linda had recommended who specialized in high-asset divorces with infidelity. Her name was Patricia Chen, and she had a reputation for leaving cheating husbands with nothing but their regrets. She tore through David's defenses like tissue paper, using all the evidence I'd gathered to paint a picture of systematic financial abuse and fraud. The first meeting with David's lawyer was almost comical. He tried to argue that the marriage had broken down due to my emotional instability, that I'd invaded David's privacy, stalked him, publicly humiliated him. Patricia listened to this with a small smile, then opened her briefcase and dropped a 3-inch thick binder on the conference table. "This is the evidence of your client's financial fraud," she said calmly. "Every transfer to hidden accounts, every purchase made with marital funds for his extramarital affair, every lie he told while systematically stealing from his wife. If you want to talk about emotional stability, let's discuss the psychological impact of economic abuse and gaslighting." David's lawyer deflated like a punctured balloon. He knew he had no case. The evidence was overwhelming, and Massachusetts is not a forgiving state when it comes to marital misconduct. The judge was not sympathetic to David's claims that he'd been planning to leave me anyway, that the money was his to do with as he pleased. Community property laws in Massachusetts are clear, and the fact that David had hidden assets and income was damning. I was awarded the Beacon Hill house, 3/4 of our liquid assets, and a significant portion of David's future earnings. The $300,000 he'd stolen was returned in full, plus damages and interest. David's parents even offered to help cover the settlement, humiliated by their son's behavior. The divorce hearing itself was almost anticlimactic. David sat slumped in his chair, his lawyer beside him, while Patricia methodically presented our case. The judge, a woman in her 60s who'd probably seen every variation of marital misconduct possible, looked increasingly disgusted as the evidence piled up. "Mr. Harrison," she said finally, turning to David, "I've been on the bench for 23 years. I've seen a lot of bad behavior in that time. But the systematic nature of your deception, the calculated theft from your wife, the use of her inheritance to fund an extramarital affair, this represents a particularly egregious violation of the marital contract. I'm awarding Mrs. Harrison the maximum allowed under Massachusetts law." David tried to protest, to claim the settlement was excessive, but the judge shut him down with a look. "You stole from your wife, Mr. Harrison. You lied to her, you gaslit her. And when she had the courage to expose your behavior, you attempted to paint her as unstable. This settlement is not punishment. It's justice. We're done here. I won't pretend the victory was sweet. There's no real winning when your marriage ends, when 17 years of your life are revealed to have been built on sand. But there was satisfaction in the justice of it, in watching someone who'd thought himself clever and untouchable face consequences for his actions. David tried to manipulate me even during the divorce proceedings, calling late at night with tearful apologies and promises to change. I never answered. I'd said everything I needed to say at that anniversary party. The rest was just noise. One voicemail he left stood out. It was 3 a.m, and he was clearly drunk. "Margaret, please," his slurred voice said. "I made mistakes. I know that. But 17 years has to mean something. We can fix this. I can fix this. Just give me another chance." I deleted it without responding. 17 years did mean something. It meant 17 years of my life I'd never get back. 17 years of building a future with someone who was building a separate future without me. 17 years of being the supportive wife, while my own dreams got smaller and smaller until they nearly disappeared. Those years meant something, but not what David thought. They meant I'd learned what I'd never accept again, what I'd never tolerate, what I deserved. People thought I'd fall apart after the divorce was final, that I'd spend months grieving what I'd lost, mourning the future I'd planned. But here's what I learned through all of this. You can't mourn something that was never real. The David I thought I married, the faithful partner and loving husband, that man never existed. He was a fiction, a performance, a mask that slipped when he thought he'd gotten away with everything. And once I accepted that, once I truly understood that I'd been in love with a lie, there was nothing to grieve, only relief. The cage door was open, and I could finally walk out. I sold the Beacon Hill house 6 months later. Too many memories, too much history. Every room held echoes of a life that had turned out to be false. The kitchen where I'd found that first receipt. The study where David had spun his lies. The bedroom where I'd lain awake countless nights while he slept peacefully, unburdened by conscience. I couldn't live there anymore. I bought a smaller place in Cambridge, near Harvard Square, in a building with tall windows and exposed brick. I'd always loved that neighborhood, the energy and creativity, the bookstores and cafes. David had hated it, called it too bohemian, too young, which should have been my first clue that we wanted different things. The Cambridge apartment was the first space that felt truly mine. I decorated it with art I loved, not pieces chosen to impress guests. I painted the walls colors David would have hated, deep teals and warm terracottas. I filled the bookshelves with novels and art books, not business tomes and real estate guides. It was smaller than the Beacon Hill house, but it felt bigger, lighter, like I could breathe fully for the first time in years. I used part of my settlement to open a small art gallery, something I'd dreamed about when I was younger, but had set aside to support David's career. The gallery specialized in emerging artists, women mostly, who were trying to find their voices and their audiences. It was deeply satisfying work, curating shows and hosting openings, helping people tell their stories through their art. Linda became my business partner, handling the administrative side while I focused on the creative. She had a head for numbers and organization, skills honed from her years in IT. We hired a young manager, a recent art school graduate named Sophie, who had brilliant instincts and boundless energy. Sophie reminded me of myself at that age, full of passion for art and creativity, eager to make her mark. Watching her flourish in the gallery, I couldn't help but wonder who I might have become if I'd pursued this path earlier. But there was no point in dwelling on lost time, only in making the most of what remained. The gallery became my purpose, my passion, the thing I woke up excited to work on. I made new friends in the art world, people who valued creativity and authenticity over wealth and status. I dated occasionally, though I was in no rush to jump into another relationship. I was learning to be alone without being lonely, to find completeness in myself rather than seeking it in someone else. It was harder than I expected, unlearning 17 years of defining myself through my marriage. I'd been David's wife for so long that I'd forgotten how to be just Margaret. But slowly, through the work at the gallery and the new friendships and the quiet evenings alone in my Cambridge apartment, I found her again. The woman I'd been before David. The woman I might have been all along if I hadn't gotten lost in someone else's story. A year after the divorce, I ran into David at a coffee shop in Back Bay. He looked older, more worn, the confidence and swagger gone from his bearing. His suit was off the rack, not custom-tailored. His hair needed cutting. The expensive watch he'd always worn was gone, replaced with something cheap and digital. He tried to approach me, to say something, but I just looked at him and kept walking. There was nothing he could say that I needed to hear. No apology could undo the damage. No explanation could make his choices acceptable. He'd made his bed, quite literally, and now he had to lie in it. Alone. Without the money and status that had defined him. Without the wife who'd supported him and the mistress who'd enjoyed his wealth. Just David and his consequences. Later, Linda asked me if seeing him had been hard. I thought about it, really considered the question, and realized it hadn't been hard at all. It had been nothing. He was nothing to me now. A stranger who'd borrowed 17 years of my life and returned them damaged. I felt no anger, no sadness, no lingering love. Oh, just a vague curiosity about how someone could destroy something so thoroughly and still expect sympathy. The experience taught me things I wish I'd known earlier in life. How to recognize the signs of financial abuse, the slow erosion of autonomy and control. How gaslighting works, the way manipulators make you doubt your own perceptions and reality. How important it is to maintain your own identity and interests within a marriage, to never become so enmeshed with another person that you lose yourself. I started volunteering at a women's shelter, talking to women who were leaving abusive relationships, sharing my story and the tools I'd used to escape. It felt important, turning my pain into something useful, something that might help others avoid the same traps I'd fallen into. One woman I worked with, Maria, reminded me so much of myself. Her husband had been controlling their finances, making her ask for money for groceries, questioning every purchase. He'd isolated her from friends and family, convinced her that she was lucky he put up with her. When she finally left, she had nothing. No savings, no job, no sense of who she was outside of being his wife. I helped Maria open her first bank account in her own name. Watched her face light up when she saw her own money, earned from a part-time job at a grocery store, sitting in an account only she could access. "It's mine," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I earned it and it's mine." That moment reminded me why the work mattered. Why exposing David hadn't just been about revenge. It had been about reclaiming my autonomy, my identity, my right to control my own life. The psychological dynamics of what David did went beyond simple infidelity. It was a pattern of narcissistic behavior, of viewing me not as a partner, but as a resource to be managed and exploited. The separate accounts, the hidden spending, the systematic transfer of assets, these weren't impulsive acts. They were calculated steps in building an exit strategy that left me with nothing while he walked away with everything. And the gaslighting, making me doubt my own perceptions when I started to notice inconsistencies, that was perhaps the cruelest part. It wasn't enough for him to betray me. He needed me to think I was crazy for noticing the betrayal. That level of manipulation is insidious because it attacks your sense of reality itself. If you can't trust your own perceptions, your own instincts, what can you trust? If you're listening to this and recognizing patterns in your own relationship, here's what I want you to know. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't let anyone convince you that you're paranoid or irrational for asking questions. Check your bank accounts regularly. Know where your money is going. Maintain your own financial identity, your own accounts, your own credit. Never give up your dreams and ambitions completely for someone else's career. A real partner will support your growth, not require you to shrink to make room for theirs. And if you discover betrayal, whether financial or emotional or physical, don't immediately blame yourself. The person who broke the trust is responsible for their choices, not you. Document everything. Keep records. Take screenshots. Create paper trails. Not because you should live in a state of paranoid surveillance, but because if your worst fears are confirmed, you'll need evidence. The legal system runs on documentation, and without proof, it's often your word against theirs. And society, unfortunately, still tends to give men the benefit of the doubt. It's been 2 years now since that anniversary party. The gallery is thriving. We just signed a lease on a larger space in the South End. Ironically, the same neighborhood where David used to meet Jessica. But I'm reclaiming that geography, making it mine. The new gallery will have twice the exhibition space, a dedicated area for workshops and artist talks, a small cafe where people can linger and discuss what they've seen. I have a circle of genuine friends who value me for who I am, not for who I'm married to. I've traveled to places David never wanted to visit, Paris and Florence and Tokyo, immersing myself in art and culture and beauty. In Paris, I spent a week at the Musée d'Orsay, studying the Impressionists, understanding how they'd broken from tradition to create something entirely new. It felt symbolic. That's what I was doing too. Breaking from the tradition of my old life to create something new. I've learned to cook new cuisines, taken up painting, joined a book club. I've built a life that's entirely mine, not a reflection of someone else's desires or needs. And I'm happy. Genuinely, deeply happy in a way I don't think I ever was during my marriage. The happiness of authenticity, of knowing yourself and being comfortable in your own skin. Last month, I had my first art show, not curating someone else's work, but displaying my own paintings. They were abstract pieces, full of color and movement, expressing emotions I hadn't known how to articulate in words. Linda said they looked like freedom. Sophie said they looked like fire. Both were right. The opening night was packed. Friends, artists, people I'd met through the gallery. No one from my old life with David. That door was closed. But this new door was wide open, full of light and possibility. I sold 3 paintings that night. People wanted to hang my vision, my perspective, my truth on their walls. It was validation I hadn't known I needed. Some people have asked if I regret the way I handled things, if the public humiliation was too much. My answer is always the same. David spent 8 months systematically betraying and robbing me. He had no problem lying to my face every single day. Why should I have shown him mercy or discretion he never extended to me? The public exposure wasn't about revenge, though I won't pretend that wasn't part of it. It was about truth, about refusing to protect someone who'd hurt me, about making sure there were consequences for his actions. And maybe, just maybe, it was about warning the next woman. Because there will be a next woman, and she deserves to know who she's getting involved with. I heard through mutual acquaintances that David is dating again, someone he met at his new job. Younger, like Jessica was. I wondered briefly if I should warn her, tell her what he's capable of, but I decided against it. Some lessons people need to learn themselves. And if she's paying attention, if she trusts her instincts, she'll figure it out before it's too late. If not, well, that's not my burden to carry anymore. I want to close by asking you something. How much of yourself are you willing to lose for someone who doesn't deserve you? How small will you make yourself to fit into someone else's vision of who you should be? What are you sacrificing right now for a relationship that might not be worth the cost? These aren't easy questions. They weren't easy for me when I finally forced myself to ask them. But they're necessary. Because life is too short and too precious to spend it living a lie. Even a comfortable one. Especially a comfortable one. Comfort can be a cage just as surely as cruelty can. Think about the dreams you've deferred, the ambitions you've set aside, the parts of yourself you've suppressed to keep the peace, to be supportive, to be the partner someone else needs you to be. Are you getting the same in return? Is the relationship reciprocal? Or are you the only one bending, changing, sacrificing? I spent 17 years being the woman David needed me to be. The supportive wife, the gracious hostess, the woman who didn't ask too many questions or demand too much attention. And in the process, I lost track of who I was, what I wanted, what I deserved. It took his betrayal to wake me up, to force me to reclaim myself. But you don't have to wait for betrayal. You can choose yourself right now. I'd love to hear from you. Where are you listening from? What time is it where you are? Have you ever experienced something similar? A betrayal that made you question everything you thought you knew? What would you have done in my situation? Would you have confronted privately or publicly? Would you have tried to save the marriage or walked away immediately? Let me know in the comments. And if this story resonated with you, if it made you feel seen or validated or inspired, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who might need to hear it. Subscribe to the channel for more stories of survival and transformation. There are 2 other videos on your screen right now that I think you'll find compelling. Stories of other women who refused to be victims and instead became warriors. Until the next story, take care of your heart. Protect it fiercely. Give it generously. But never, ever give it to someone who doesn't treasure it the way it deserves to be treasured. You are worth more than lies and betrayal. You are worth more than being someone's backup plan or their comfortable safety net. You are worth truth and loyalty and genuine love. Don't settle for less. I did for 17 years, and while I can't get that time back, I can make sure the rest of my life is lived on my own terms. You can too. But let me bring you back to that emergency room where this whole chapter began to close. Standing there, watching Nurse Sandra expose David's injury to the harsh fluorescent lights, I realized this was the final piece of evidence I'd needed all along. The bite mark wasn't just physical proof of his infidelity, it was poetic justice. After months of him making me feel crazy for noticing the obvious signs, here was undeniable, literal evidence that he couldn't explain away. David finally stammered out something about a misunderstanding, an accident, nothing that made any coherent sense. Nurse Sandra looked at me with those knowing eyes and said, "Would you like me to document this injury with photographs? For your records." She emphasized those last 2 words, and I understood immediately what she was offering. More evidence. More documentation of David's lies. "Yes, please," I said, my voice steady. "For my records." David's face went from red to white. "Margaret," he whispered urgently, "can we talk about this privately?" "I think we're past private conversations, don't you?" I replied. "Besides, I'm sure whatever happened is perfectly innocent. Isn't that what you always say?" The irony wasn't lost on him. I watched him deflate, all the bluster and manipulation draining out of him like air from a punctured tire. This was different from the anniversary party exposure. That had been calculated, planned, executed with precision. This was raw and immediate and accidental. He'd gotten hurt during an encounter with Jessica, or maybe it was someone else by that point. I didn't know and didn't care. What mattered was that his lies had literally marked him, and there was no gaslighting his way out of a bite mark. Nurse Sandra took her photographs, documented everything, made notes in David's chart that would become part of his permanent medical record. The injury requiring medical attention sustained during extramarital activity. I wondered if his health insurance would question the claim. I hoped they would. We left the hospital separately that night. David slunk out to his car, limping slightly, humiliated and exposed once again. I walked out with my head high, Nurse Sandra's quiet smile following me out the door. She'd seen this scenario before, she'd told me as we waited for David's discharge papers. Women coming in with their cheating husbands, forced to witness evidence they'd been denying for months or years. Some women fell apart. Others, like me, found strength in the confirmation. "You're going to be okay," she'd said, squeezing my hand. "Better than okay. You're free." And she was right. That emergency room visit was 2 years ago now, just a few months before I finalized the divorce. It was the universe's way of validating every choice I'd made, every piece of evidence I'd gathered, every moment I'd trusted my instincts over David's lies. The bite mark faded from his body, but the truth it represented never would. In the months after the divorce, I learned things about myself I'd never known. I learned I was stronger than I'd thought, more resilient, more capable of rebuilding from ruins. I learned that happiness isn't something you find in another person. It's something you cultivate within yourself. I learned that being alone is different from being lonely, and that solitude can be a gift rather than a punishment. The gallery gave me purpose, but it also gave me community, artists and patrons who valued authenticity, who celebrated truth in all its messy, complicated forms. I curated shows that told stories of transformation, of women finding their voices after years of silence. Each exhibition felt personal, like I was telling my own story through other people's art. There was one show in particular, about 6 months after the divorce finalized, that changed something fundamental in me. It was a solo exhibition by an artist named Claire, a woman in her 60s who'd started painting after her husband's death, revealed a secret second family he'd maintained for decades. Her paintings were explosive with color and emotion, abstract but visceral. They screamed pain and whispered healing in equal measure. At the opening, Claire gave a talk about her work. She spoke about the gift of betrayal, how it shattered the illusion and revealed the truth. How devastating that process was, but also how necessary. Without the shattering, she said, we never learn we're strong enough to reassemble ourselves into something new, something better. I stood in the back of the gallery, tears streaming down my face, and understood that I wasn't just healing from David's betrayal. I was becoming someone I'd never had the chance to be, someone authentic and whole and entirely my own. The women's shelter work became more important to me over time. I started teaching workshops on financial literacy, helping women understand their rights and resources. I shared my story not for sympathy, but as a roadmap. If you recognize yourself in my experience, I'd tell them, you're not alone, and you're not crazy. Trust yourself. Document everything. Plan your exit carefully. And when you're ready, walk away with your head high and don't look back. Maria, the woman I'd helped open her first bank account, became a friend. She got a better job, found her own apartment, started dating again. Watching her transformation reminded me of my own journey. We were both emerging from cocoons we'd been trapped in for too long, spreading wings we hadn't known we had. Last month, Maria invited me to her daughter's graduation party. It was a small gathering in her modest but cheerful apartment, full of the family she'd been isolated from during her marriage. Her ex-husband wasn't there, had no idea where she lived or how to contact her. She'd created a new life completely separate from the old one, just as I had. As I watched Maria laugh with her daughter, comfortable in her own skin in a way I'd never seen before, I realized this was the real victory, not the money from the divorce settlement or the public humiliation of David or even the gallery's success. The victory was in reclaiming ourselves, in refusing to be defined by someone else's betrayal, in choosing to build something new from the rubble of what was destroyed. I think about Nurse Sandra sometimes, wonder how many other women she's helped with her knowing looks and strategic documentation. Wonder if she understands the impact of her compassion in those fluorescent-lit moments of crisis. I sent her a thank you card months later, told her what her kindness had meant. She sent back a simple reply, Keep being strong. The world needs more women like you. But I'm not special. That's what I want you to understand. I'm not uniquely strong or brave or resilient. I'm just a woman who decided enough was enough, who trusted her instincts when someone tried to make her doubt them, who chose herself when the alternative was losing herself completely. You can do the same. You have the same strength within you, even if you don't recognize it yet. It's there, waiting for the moment you decide you're worth fighting for. So here's my final question for you, the one I ask myself every morning when I wake up in my Cambridge apartment, sunlight streaming through those tall windows. What kind of life are you building? Is it yours, or is it someone else's version of what your life should be? Are you the architect of your own existence, or are you a supporting character in someone else's story? You get to decide. Every single day, you get to decide. I chose freedom. I chose truth. I chose myself. And 2 years later, I can tell you with absolute certainty that it was the best decision I ever made. The only regret I have is that I didn't make it sooner. Your life is yours to claim. Don't wait for permission. Don't wait for the perfect moment. Don't wait until the evidence is so overwhelming you can't deny it anymore. If something feels wrong, trust that feeling. Investigate, document, plan. And when you're ready, act. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here, for hearing me, for maybe seeing yourself in some of these experiences. Whatever you're going through, whatever decisions you're facing, I hope my story gives you strength, courage, permission to choose yourself. Take care of your heart, protect it fiercely, give it generously, but never, ever, give it to someone who doesn't treasure it the way it deserves to be treasured. You are worth more than lies and betrayal. You are worth more than being someone's backup plan or their comfortable safety net. You are worth truth and loyalty and genuine love. Thank you for listening.